All right, tonight we are down in Matthew chapter 27 and starting with verse 11. Now, when we're in this section, obviously we're down now to the last days of Jesus, and all four gospel writers deal with this information. So it's kind of hard to put it together. And yet you have to put it together in some way or another, because one will tell a lengthy event about one thing, and then another one will tell a more lengthy story about another thing. And if we leave out some of these things, then we leave out part of that story. When you get down to it, you don't need to know the whole story. Obviously, that's true. For instance, tonight, Matthew, as we start out, is going to be talking in just very short terms here, as we will see here in the first stage of the Roman trial, where Jesus now is going before Pilate the first time. And as you look right there in Matthew chapter 27, verses 11 through 14, so we've just got those few verses. But if you look on over to John chapter 18, then you've got 10 verses. And so we'll kind of jump back and forth to try to pick up as many of the details as we can to see what really happened with Jesus as we're going through this. So what I want to do tonight is I'll not try to get into all four Gospels. We start getting lost if we say this and that, because Mark and Luke tell just about exactly the same thing as Matthew, but John will tell a little bit more. So when we kind of jump back and forth, it may be just a little bit confusing, but it will be because it's a section that we need to look at in order to get some very important material. So let's read now Matthew chapter 27, verses 11 through 14, to set the stage for what we're talking about at this time. Now, they have arrested Jesus, they brought him in, and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, has met, and they have determined that they are going to put Jesus to death. Now, the only way that they can put him to death is by taking him to the Roman government and having the Roman government put him to death, because Rome had allowed the Jews to run their own affairs. The city of Jerusalem was under Jewish authority, under the Sanhedrin, and they were able to run their own affairs unless it got out of hand. Now, Caesar had said, if you have any trouble, if there's going to be any uproars, going to be any tumults, then he'll just move his army right in there. And so the Roman government says you can go ahead, do what you want to do, because it was a highly religious city. However, you can't put anybody to death. Only the Roman government could put people to death. So let's look here now at verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, now this is going to be Pilate. He's the governor of Palestine. Then that section, not Palestine, but the governor of Judea, that section of land that is down there. So he stood before him, saying, art thou the king of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, thou sayest, which is the way that they would say, you said it, or it is as you said. In other words, you have spoken the truth. What that statement means is, I am. And when he was accused by the chief priest and the elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, hearest thou not how many things they have witnessed against thee? And he gave him no answer, not even one word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. Now, let's try to put ourselves in this situation. Jesus has already dealt with this Sanhedrin for the past 3 years. He knows the kind of people they are. Obviously, being divine, he knows what is in their mind. But even as a pure human being, why, he understands how corrupt they really are. He knows that they have made arrangements with Pilate. They've bribed him. He knows the Sanhedrin is a corrupt body. He knows that they intend to put him to death. And so to deal with them is like dealing with a group of people that you know are liars. So these people bring him to Pilate. Now, when Pilate asked him a question, and he said, now, are you king of the Jews? Why, then he said, yes, I am. In other words, you said it. Then these guys began to make all kind of accusations. They began then to spit out all of this stuff. Well, he did this and he did that and blah, 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 and we will hear. And Pilate's asking him, is this true? Now, Jesus is not even going to give them the dignity of answering one word to their accusations. In other words, he's letting Pilate know these guys really have nothing to say. So he wouldn't answer. Now, that's the story that Matthew gives us. That's the kernel. That's the basics of the story. Let's flip over now to John the 18th chapter and verse 28. And John will tell us exactly the same thing, only he'll give us just a little bit more of the details as we get in here. So it said, and they lead Jesus unto, therefore from Caiaphas unto the praetorium. Now the praetorium was the building where Pilate would have been ruling. That's where he would have been there. We might call it the courthouse today, the government building. It said that they might, and they themselves entered not into the praetorium, that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So now, let's put ourselves in the proper perspective. Jesus was betrayed on Thursday night. That's when Pilate went out. That's when they brought him in and arrested him. Sometime early in the morning, sometime, let's say, between 3 and 5 o'clock in there, or maybe before, the Jewish Sanhedrin meets, and they question him, and they determine they're going to put him to death. Now, they're going to take him to Pilate. Now, it's real early in the morning right now, because we're going to see some other things that will happen, and then finally John is going to tell us, and now it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So this is way before 6 o'clock when these things are happening here. All right, now this would be 6 o'clock on Friday morning. We're going to use our time. It's kind of interesting that, of course, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they use Jewish time. John uses Roman time when he gives the time, and Roman time is the time we use, so I'll just use that. But now, they had the Feast of the Passover. All right, now, this is now on Friday morning. So let's think about it at, let's say, 4 o'clock, 4:30 on Friday morning. Now, the Sanhedrin brings him over to Pilate to try to get Pilate to render a death sentence. All right, Friday morning. Now, Friday morning is they ate the Passover last night, and they'll be eating these meals now really for the next 7 days. Now, they don't want to defile themselves. They don't want to defile themselves now in this particular way here right now. So they say, we can't go in this Gentile building. So they back off. They won't go in there. And they answered and said unto him, in verse 29, and Pilate therefore went out unto them and said, what accusation bring you against this man? So what is the accusation? What is the charge? And they answered and said unto him, if this man were not an evildoer, we should not have delivered him unto thee. Now think about that. Now that wouldn't be so bad if some dummy like myself said that. But even if I said that, suppose I took you to court. And we're at court, and the judge said, okay, Lowell, what charge do you bring against them? They call your name. And I said, well, if they weren't an evildoer, I wouldn't have brought them to court. So, judge, take it over. Find them guilty. Why, you would expect me to know something better than that. But it's the Sanhedrin who is making these charges. And it's just unimaginable that they would make such a charge as that. Then 31, Pilate therefore said unto them, he said, take him therefore and judge him according to your own law. So Pilate knows that this is a Jewish thing. He knows, and we'll find out in a little while, he knows that the only reason they're bringing him up is because of their envy. They envy him. Now, why would they envy him? He's come down out of that mountain, and all those people went out, and they are hailing him as the king. The people are turning to him rather than the Sanhedrin, and they are envying him. Now, everybody in here, except me, has envied. So you'll have to tell me what it is, because I don't know. What happened when you envied? What is envy? That's what I'm getting at. When I envy you, when I envy Pauline, since I never envied, I won't know what to do, so you tell me what to expect. I envy Pauline, what will it be? It's obviously going to be a feeling, isn't it? It's not something I do. It's not that I go down and I slap her. But it's a feeling that I've got. It's kind of like if I love Pauline, what I do. Well, you say you can tell it by what your action, but love is an attitude. Love is something you do up here in your mind. And so we've defined that. What is envy? Because these people are envying Jesus. And Pilate knows that. So what is their feeling? Nobody in here is envied. Boy, I was wrong. I tell you. If it makes you really angry, okay? And short-tempered. Well, I'm mad at you. But what caused me to be angry? See, you're telling me the feeling, which I'm after. I want these feelings. But what is envy? What's that? Jealous? Almost. Not quite. They're two different words. What is envy? That's kind of a toughie, isn't it? It's what? Yeah, but that's what you do. See, when I envy, now I'm not going to be vindictive to Pauline until first of all I envy her. I'm trying to get down to what I do when I'm envying her before I'm vindictive.
Well, they would feel bad about his popularity. They would feel bad inside, I guess.
Okay, it's that attitude that causes you to feel bad when you see the success of another person, something they have that you want. That really is what it is. That you see something they have, you don't feel that they deserve it. You deserve it. See, I deserve it. But Pauline got it. Does that happen sometimes in, let's say sports, where one guy will be the star of the game, but another guy will get the trophy? See? And in the church or in your own life, you earn certain things at work, but somebody else gets the credit for it, and they get a promotion because you've worked so hard, but they got it. How does it make you feel? See? So it's that feeling of hurt. It's that feeling of hurt that you have when you see somebody get something that you want. See? That you want. Now, when you have that feeling, now we've identified it, so now I know that when Pauline gets something here, some great thing to happen to her, and I start feeling, she didn't deserve that. I deserve it a lot more than she does. Before I ever get into my anger, before I ever get into saying anything ugly, before I ever get into being vindictive, I know I'm entering into the realm of envy, don't I? Okay. So that's what I'm trying to identify. That's what these people were. They looked at Jesus, and he has something they want. He has something they want. The crowds have turned to him, not them. We want the crowds to follow us. So, now we're back to what you're saying, anger, vindictiveness. So what are they going to do to solve this problem? When you get envious of somebody, the thing you do to solve the problem is you try to destroy them. Try to take away whatever they've got so you can get it. All right, that's what these people are doing. Pilate knows that. Pilate understands. That's all this thing is. These people can't even bring up a charge. And he knows that they are just bickering over their own, instead of them having the superiority that they should have, that they thought, Jesus here's got it. So you take him and judge him to your own law. The Jews said unto him, it's not lawful for us to put any man to death. Now what would that tell you? Well, he said, you take him and judge him according to your own law. Now then, they are telling, they just confessed why they have brought Jesus to them, to Pilate. The only thing we're interested in, Pilate, is not judging him according to law, it's killing him. We want him put to death. Now, they charged him with blasphemy. Blasphemy is a sin that the law of Moses said is worthy of death. But what would happen if they told Pilate, he blasphemed, and you need to put him to death? What would they say? Would Pilate care? What would happen if I took you to court tomorrow, and I'm in there and I'm really mad? And I said, do you know they didn't partake of the Lord's Supper last Sunday? And I charge you with that. That judge is going to look at me. That's the same way with blasphemy here. It's unbelievable, really. So what they're saying is, we want him put to death. It says, is not willing for us to put any man to death, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what manner of death he should die. Now, here's the interesting thing. We're going to talk about that. We'll see it right here. That, first of all, we'll put this up. Pilate said unto him, take him yourself. Judge him according to your own law. They said it's not lawful to put him to death. And it says, this happened. They're bringing him to the Roman government, and they're not going to put him to death so that the words of Jesus might be fulfilled. By the way, if the Jews had put Jesus to death, how would they have done it? They would have stoned him. They would have stoned him. That's how they put Stephen to death and so forth later on. They would have stoned him. But Jesus has already prophesied how he would die. Now let's look back at Matthew 20. Jesus told his disciples, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered unto the chief priest and the scribes. Now who delivered him to the chief priest and the scribes, the rulers? Judas. And they shall condemn him to death. The Sanhedrin is going to condemn him to death. And shall deliver him unto the Gentiles. Who would the Gentiles be? Pilate. To mock and to scourge and to crucify. And the third day he shall be raised up. But Jesus tells them he knows how he will die. That he's going to be delivered there. They're going to mock me. They're going to scourge me. That is, beat me to the point of almost death. And then to crucify. Now the Romans were the only ones, as far as I know, on the face of the earth who have ever practiced crucifixion. They invented it, and they crucified the people. Jesus said, that is how I will be put to death. Another time he said, if the Son of Man be lifted up. And he's talking, this is not the only place that he said that. Okay, so now then, they brought him in, and Pilate has heard the first time. Now, he's heard what has happened here in the first time. Now, see Luke 23, 5 through 7 for the end of this trial. So let's turn over to Luke. In Luke 23, Luke is going to tell us something that Matthew and John didn't tell us. So in Luke 23, verses 5 through 7, well, he gives us this. It says, but they were the more urgent, saying. Now, they just kept on Pilate. Now, remember, what John and Matthew has told us, that they said he's caused a lot of trouble, and they didn't bring a charge. But now then, they start bringing charges before Pilate. But they were the more urgent, once Pilate said, take him, saying, he stirreth up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, and beginning from Galilee unto this place. So this guy is a troublemaker. This guy is stirring up all kind of problems. Now they're getting ready to conjure up this accusation. We want you to take him and kill him to stop all these problems that he's been causing. But they said a magic word. And the magic word they said was, beginning from Galilee unto this place. Now, when Pilate heard the word Galilee, he began to see there might be an out for him. Have you ever got yourself in a predicament? Have you ever noticed how I said that word? Nobody ever brags on me when I say something right. You always make fun of me when I say something wrong. Remember how I used to say predicament? That's the way it should be said, predicament. But I think I got it down, the predicament. I like the way I talk. Okay. All right, have you ever got yourself into a predicament where you're just searching for any way out? If there's just any way out of this thing? So he mentioned, this guy's caused trouble from Galilee. Bang! That's Herod's territory. Pilate wasn't over Galilee. You mean he caused trouble up in Galilee? I'm going to send him to Herod. See? So look, but when Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man were from Galilean. So he said, are you a Galilean? And when he knew that he was of Herod's jurisdiction, he sent unto Herod, who himself was at Jerusalem in those days. So now he sends him up to Herod and to try to get rid of him, hoping that Herod would be able to dispense with this thing in some way or another that's there. And Herod and Pilate at this time, they were enemies, and so he's going to give him Jesus to try to take care of. Now, and by the way, I think maybe I have it on the next chart right here. Well, if I do, I'll get it here in a minute. Herod and Pilate both lived up at Caesarea. Neither one of them lived down at Jerusalem. Both of them had big palaces down at Jerusalem, but they lived up at Caesarea. That's where their home was. And so they would come down to Jerusalem whenever they needed to come down on business, and they both had magnificent palaces that were down there. But it says, now so what I'm pointing out is, Herod is in town. Herod is in town now instead of up where he normally lived. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceeding glad, for he was a long time desirous to see him, because he had heard concerning him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. And he questioned him in many words, but he answered him nothing. So he wouldn't answer Herod anything that is there. I think this is really where we've got it right in here. That we've got it here, that Herod and Pilate lived up there. Now, Jesus goes up to Herod. He stands before him. Now, we got Herod's previous knowledge of Jesus is this. When Jesus went before Herod, it really tickled Herod. Herod was glad because Herod had heard about Jesus doing all of these things, and he wanted Jesus to do some miracles, put on the dog and pony show, I guess, show him these miracles that he could do. But Jesus here is not even going to answer him. By the way, this is the same Herod that Jesus, on another occasion down there, called that old fox. You go tell that old fox a certain thing. So he's standing up there, and Herod asks him questions. He won't even answer Herod. And the chief priest and the scribes stood, vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers set him at naught, and mocked him, arraying him in gorgeous apparel, and sent him back to Pilate. So they then started mocking him and making fun of him. Evidently, they took an old robe or some piece of royal garment that was out there. They found something. They brought it in and they threw it around him as though he was a king, and just making fun of him, and sent him back. In verse 12, and Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before they were at enmity one with the other. So now, here it is. These guys hated each other, but Herod thought, boy, if Pilate was good enough to set him up to me, why, he set him back down, and it did resolve their differences, and both of them became friends then at that time. So now then, he comes back down, and he's going to be brought back to Pilate again. He's going to have these 3 Roman trials. Now this time, when he's brought back to Pilate, he's going to be sentenced to be crucified. And so now we're going to study Matthew 27. Then we look at John the 18th chapter, because we've got a lot more things in there. So let's go back to Matthew chapter 27 and start out now with verse 15, where we left off this last time. All right. Now verse 15. Now at the feast, now this is after he's brought back. Now he had this feast. Now at the feast, the governor was wrought or accustomed to release unto the multitude one prisoner, whom they would or whom they will. Now we don't know how this custom got started. I think it's pretty easy to come up with a reasonable opinion of how it got started. Anything in the political realm comes up to it's a good political move for the ruler. The Jews would want especially in those days where they had a lot of political prisoners, to release somebody to us. In other words, show us that you respect us. And so they did that. We even find that today, especially over in that world, in this chaotic world that we're in. Every once in a while, why Israel or somebody will release a prisoner in order to have some good relationships with somebody else that is over there. So at any rate, Pilate had this custom. I'll release some Jew, whichever one you want, every time the Passover comes around. And it said in verse 16, and they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Now he's notable. He's famous. We don't know what he's famous for, except we do know what he had done. We do know, we'll find out, that he had led some insurrections, and as he's leading these insurrections, he committed murder. And he was also a robber. So, how do you put it together? What insurrection? I don't know. It evidently was something that the Romans were doing, and he was fighting against the Romans. He went in, he led an insurrection against the Romans. In doing this, he killed some people he shouldn't have killed, and he stole some things that he shouldn't have stolen. And so he's in jail now. It said, when therefore they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? So he gives them a choice. Which one of these do you want? You don't have a third choice. For he knew that for envy they had delivered him up. So he thought, surely this will give them a way out. This will give them a way out. Now, Pilate's tried his way out with Herod. Now then, this will give them a way out, because he knows the only thing they have against him is just they're upset. They're envious. And surely they will ask that Jesus be released rather than this horrible criminal to be released on society. There. It said in verse 18, for he knew that for envy they had delivered him up, and while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, have thou nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. So now Pilate gets a message at this time from his wife. Now you have to understand, Pilate is squeezed in. Pilate knows that Jesus is not guilty. He's already shown that. He's tried to get out of it by giving them to Herod. That won't work. He's tried to give the Jews a way to get out. That won't work. The Jewish mob is out there out of control, and he's wondering what to do. Now then, while he's there in the middle of this thing, a messenger comes from his wife and says, don't have anything to do with that righteous man. Because of him, I've suffered a lot. I've had some horrible dreams about this. Now, this brings up the question, were these dreams divine dreams sent by God, or were they normal dreams? And the answer is, I don't know, and I don't have any idea. But you say, well, if they were normal dreams, surely they wouldn't put this much emphasis on it. But they did. Now, you got to put yourself back in the Roman shoes. The Romans used dreams as a major source of how they thought their God communicated with them. This was a big deal in the Romans, big deal in idolatry, this idolatry realm in which they were dealing with. Remember, these are the same people that would get up every morning and they would have a priest to tell them whether they should go to war or whether they shouldn't, whatever they wanted to do in there. And they had this priest already trained that he's supposed to know if the general wants to go to war, then he finds an omen that says you're supposed to go to war, see? So what they would do is that they would go out, and if it's bad weather, lightning or thunder, why the priest then would make his observation. He would read the skies, and then he would say, if the general wanted to go to war, that your gods are telling you to go to war. Or if he didn't, the gods are telling you not to. If the weather's really clear, they would look for the birds. That's the next thing. And they would look how the birds were flying. And if the birds were flying in flocks, if the birds were flying north or south. And so this priest, this idolatrous priest, he had the ability, God-given ability, to read the birds, and that was how God was telling them what you ought to do. Right? And if the birds weren't flying, then they had what's called the sacred roosters, and they always kept them. They would go out, kill a rooster, open him up, and read his liver and his gall and so forth, and then decide, okay, this is it. So they didn't move without their gods talking. Dreams is one of the big ways. So put yourself in Pilate's shoes. This is the same as if somebody told you and me, when we were in trouble, we were trying to make a decision, that God just sent a message and said, don't you rule against that man. So here he is. He's in a bad situation. All right. Then it says in verse 20, now the chief priest and the elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. But the governor answered and said unto them, which of these two will that I release unto you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate saith unto them, what then shall I do unto Jesus who's called Christ? And they all say, let him be crucified. Now they've got the mob on their hands here. They've got the mob that they've convinced that he needs to be crucified. So now they're all crying for crucifixion. And he said, why? What evil hath he done? So how am I going to put him to death? What's he done that's evil? And they cried out exceedingly, saying, let him be crucified. So Pilate now is sitting there on that judgment seat. He's tried to get out of it every way he knows. His wife has sent a message which he would take as a message from God. Don't crucify him. Don't hurt the man. And out here are the Jewish nation. And now then they're mobbed together. And they're all crying, crucify him, without giving any charge. So when Pilate saw that he prevailed nothing, but rather that a tumult was arising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this righteous man. See ye to it. So now then he's telling them, I will not go along with this. He washes his hands. I will not be guilty of this man's blood. you see to it yourself. And all the people answered and said, His blood be upon us and on our children. Then released he unto them Barabbas, but Jesus he scourged and delivered to be crucified. So here then, once he saw that he couldn't prevail against them, why, he said, okay, and so he scourged Jesus, that is, he beat him, and then delivered him to be crucified. Now, according to the Romans, they always scourged people who were going to be crucified. They beat them. They beat them to the point to where many of them died in the beating. And so he's going to scourge him then and deliver him up to be crucified. I want to look right here. Okay, verse 27. Let's keep reading for right now here. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered unto him the whole band, that is, the whole army that he had around him. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. So here's that robe, evidently, that was sent back with Herod, a kingly type thing. And they planted a crown of thorns and put it upon his head. So they got some thorns. Now, if you've never seen a thorn tree, the thorns are about this long. They're inch to 2 inches long. We had a lot of thorn trees back there where I grew in the Midwest. And these thorn trees, with these thorns, were so tough that many times if a car ran over them, they would puncture the tire, just like nails. And you fix your tire and you find a thorn in it, just like you'd normally find a nail in it. And so these big thorns wrapped around it and put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. So they put this reed or this stick in his right hand. So now they have this royal garment, kingly garment on him. They have his throne on him made out of thorns, and they have this staff in his hand, which was his scepter, his king's scepter. So they're mocking him, making a king out of him then. That's here. And they kneeled down before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! So now they're making fun of him in here. And said, and they spat upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. So think how this would feel. You got that matted bunch of thorns up there. They took that stick, walking stick, out of his hand, slammed it down on top of his head, squashed those thorns on top of his head. And when they had mocked him, they took off from him the robe and put on him his garments and led him away to be crucified. Let's quickly turn to John. John, the 18th chapter and verse 39. And here we find the same story, only we'll find some more incidents that is in here. All right, verse 39. In verse 38, Jesus here has said, is that where I want to start right here? 1839, I guess 38. Well, actually we should start in verse 33, but our time is going to run out, so let me say this. I'm going to start in 33 anyway, and I'll skip something else. Pilate therefore entered into the praetorium and called Jesus and said unto him, Art thou king of the Jews? Jesus answered, Did thou sayest this, or the others concerning me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation brought this up. And then verse 36, Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. And now my kingdom is not from hence, or this world. Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? And Jesus said, Thou sayest that I'm a king. Yes, I'm a king. To this end have I been born, and to this end am I come into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. And Pilate saith unto him, What is truth? Now again, we don't know whether Pilate was making fun of him. You'd had to be there to listen to him. Did he say, What is truth? Or was he saying, I don't know what the truth is. What is the truth of this matter? What is truth? That's argued about ever since this was said right there, and I don't think there's any way of finding it out. This is when then they're going to deliver him up then. Okay, let's start out now in verse 38. And when he had said this, he went out again unto the Jews and saith, I find no crime in him, but you have a custom that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? And they cried out therefore, saying, Not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers planted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple garment. And they came unto him and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. And Pilate went out again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him out unto you, that you may know that I find no crime in him. I'm wanting to read this to you to see, Matthew didn't tell us about this. He said he scourged him and set him off to be crucified. But before he set him off, he scourged him, and then he brought Jesus out with that purple garment around him, and then beaten half to death, of where he's just a bloody pulp, and shows the Jews, Behold, King. In other words, wouldn't this be enough, in Pilate's idea, wouldn't this be enough to let him go, you see? So he said, Behold the man. When therefore the chief priest and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate saith unto him, Take him yourself and crucify him, for I find no crime in him. And the Jews answered, We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. So now then Pilate knows why they want him to kill him, because of their law. When Pilate therefore heard this, he said, this saying, he was the more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? When he heard he was the Son of God. From where did you come? But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said unto him, Speaketh thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to release thee, or power to crucify thee? So Pilate is saying, Look, fella, we're down at the end of this thing. Tell me where you're from. These people say that you claim to be the Son of God. Where is it you're from? And he said, I have the power. And then in verse 11, Jesus answered him, You would have no power against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that hath delivered me unto thee hath greater sin. Pilate, you would have no power at all if it wasn't given to you by God. The power you have has been given to you by God. You have a job to do, and the people that's delivering me to you, have greater sin than you do. Upon this, Pilate sought to release him. So Pilate's trying to get rid of him again. But the Jews cried out, saying, Now here's the clincher, here's the biggie, right down at the end. The Jews are going to give him a reason he can't refuse. If thou release this man, thou art not Caesar's friend. Every one that maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. So what these Jews are telling Pilate is this. Look, buddy, if you release him, we'll be reporting this to the Caesar, that we delivered a man to you that is in opposition to the Caesar, trying to take over the kingship of the Caesar. And when the Caesar hears that you release that kind of a guy, Pilate knows what's going to happen to him. So it's a political argument he can't get around. He says, 13, When Pilate therefore heard these words, he brought Jesus out, sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Golgotha. Now it was at the preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. So now he's getting ready to pronounce a sentence. But Pilate is getting ready to take another swat at these Jews. He brings him out, and this is where it says about the 6th hour. Now, this is Roman time, and they started their clock at midnight, so about 6 o'clock in the morning, right now. And he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. Why would that be an insult to these Jews? He's claiming, he's telling them, look at your king. Of course, this would infuriate them. And they therefore cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto him, Shall I crucify your king? You see how these words are getting in there, back and forth in here? You want to crucify your king? We have no king but Caesar. Then therefore he delivered unto them to be crucified. So finally they broke him down when they brought in Caesar, and he knew that there would be a big uproar. He would lose his office if all the Jews went up and said he released somebody who was trying to take over Caesar's seat. So next week we'll start then with the trip to the cross. Okay, class dismissed.